He turned off the TV, looked me dead in the eye, and said 2 words that erased 10 years of my life: "Get out." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stayed quiet, because I had no idea that the very next day, a man would show up at the door and change everything before we begin. If you believe silence can be more powerful than shouting, tap subscribe, hit like, and tell me in the comments, what would you do if the person you trusted most suddenly erased you? The TV had been on for so long that the room no longer felt like a living space. It felt like background noise to a life that had quietly stopped moving forward. Some reality show played on repeat, voices arguing about betrayal, money, loyalty, people yelling their truths at strangers while applause cues told the audience when to react. I remember thinking how unreal it all sounded, how staged, how loud. And yet, in our house, the silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. He sat on the couch like nothing in the world was wrong, one leg stretched out, the other bent at the knee. The remote rested loosely in his hand, thumb hovering like he might change the channel at any moment. He looked relaxed, comfortable in a way only someone with control can be. I stood near the kitchen counter, folding the same dish towel again and again. It didn't need it. I'd already folded it perfectly the first time, but my hands wouldn't stop. They needed something repetitive, something grounding, because my chest felt tight, like my lungs were working on half capacity. I knew something was wrong. When you spend 10 years with someone, you don't need words to tell you that a shift has happened. You feel it in the air, in the way silence stretches too long, in the way eye contact disappears. His jaw was clenched, a muscle twitching near his temple. He hadn't looked at me once in over an hour. "Can we talk?" I asked. My voice sounded come, like it didn't belong to the moment, like it belonged to someone who still believed conversations fixed things. He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed a button on the remote. The TV went silent. That click hit me harder than yelling ever could. The sudden absence of noise felt violent, like everything we'd been avoiding was now standing in the middle of the room, exposed. He took a slow breath, not a frustrated one, not an emotional one. It was the kind of breath people take when they've rehearsed a moment over and over in their head and are finally ready to perform it. Then, he turned and looked at me. His face wasn't angry. That scared me more than anger ever could. Out, 2 words. No explanation, no warning, no build-up. For a second, my brain refused to accept what I'd just heard. It searched for alternatives, softer meanings. Maybe he meant go outside. Maybe he needed space. Maybe I was misunderstanding. "What?" I asked. He stood up abruptly, irritation flashing across his face like a crack spreading through glass. I said, "Get out." He repeated, "I'm done." Done. The word echoed in my head, colliding with memories I wasn't ready to lose. 10 years, a decade of shared mornings, shared bills, shared plans, reduced to a word people use when they finish a task they don't care about anymore. My chest tightened, but no tears came. Shock has a way of freezing you, like your emotions are locked behind thick ice. Did I do something? I asked. I hated myself for the question, the moment it left my mouth, for how small it made me feel. He scoffed and dragged a hand down his face like I was exhausting him just by standing there. "I don't want to do this," he snapped. "I don't owe you a conversation. Pack your stuff and leave." I looked around the living room. The couch I picked out after months of saving, the coffee table I sanded and refinished myself, the framed photos on the wall, birthdays, holidays, vacations, proof that I hadn't imagined us. "This is my home too," I said quietly. That's when he laughed. Not real laughter, not humor. Dismissal. Double quotes. "No," he said, "it's really not." Something inside me shut down completely. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't shatter. It simply went still, like a door closing somewhere deep inside my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Double quotes. "Okay." I said the word, surprised both of us. He stared at me, clearly waiting for the explosion he'd prepared himself for. He wanted tears, accusations, proof that I still needed him, but I didn't give him that. I walked into the bedroom and pulled a suitcase from the closet. The zipper sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet house. My hands shook as I folded my clothes, but my movements were slow and controlled. Each item felt heavier than it should have. Old t-shirts, work clothes, a sweater he once told me made me look safe. I wondered when that stopped being enough. When I walked past him with the suitcase, he raised an eyebrow. "That's it?" he asked. "You're not going to say anything?" I stopped and met his eyes. What would you like me to say? I asked. He scoffed, annoyed now, confused, unbelievable. Maybe it was. But what he didn't understand, what he couldn't see yet, was that silence can be terrifying, especially when you expect chaos. I left without looking back. I slept on my sister's couch that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to unfamiliar sounds. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't slow down. I replayed everything: the sacrifices, the excuses, the times. I ignored my instincts because loving him felt easier than trusting myself. By morning, the shock had hardened into something sharper. Clarity. People don't erase you overnight without a reason. And whatever his reason was, it wasn't clean. I didn't know it yet. But the man who would knock on the door the next day was already moving closer to my life. And staying quiet that night, that decision would change everything. I didn't sleep. I lay on my sister's couch staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft ticking of a wall clock that wasn't mine. Every sound felt too loud in the unfamiliar quiet. The cushions smelled like laundry detergent and something floral, comforting but wrong, like borrowing someone else's life for the night. After my phone sat on the coffee table, screen dark. I kept expecting it to light up an apology, a question. We need to talk. Nothing came. Around 3 in the morning, I sat up and wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders. The shock had worn off just enough for the ache to sneak in. It settled deep in my chest, heavy and dull, like something unfinished pressing down on me. I replayed the night again and again. The way he didn't look angry, the way he didn't look sorry, the way he looked relieved. That was the part that hurt the most. By morning, the numbness cracked into something sharper. Not pain exactly, awareness. My sister left early for work. She didn't ask questions, didn't push me to explain. She just hugged me longer than usual and said, "Take your time." The kindness almost undid me, but I held it together until the door closed behind her. That's when my phone buzzed. His name, not a call, a text. "Can you come by and grab the rest of your stuff? I'll be out." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that 10 years had ended with 2 words. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Okay." The drive back to the house felt unreal, like my body was moving on autopilot. I stopped at the same lights, turned down the same streets, parked in the same driveway I'd pulled into thousands of times before. But something was different. There was a black sedan parked out front. I didn't recognize it. I sat there for a moment with the engine running, my hands gripping the steering wheel. He never had visitors during the day, not friends, not family, no one. A tight feeling settled in my stomach when I stepped out of the car and walked toward the door. It opened before I could knock. A man stood there, neatly dressed. Calm, in a way that felt intentional. His eyes studied me, not rudely, but carefully, like he was confirming something he already knew. "Are you Emily?" he asked. My heart dropped. "Yes," I said slowly. "Who are you?" He extended his hand. "My name is Richard," he said. "I was hoping I'd catch you today." That single sentence sent a chill through me. "Hoping," I repeated. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the living room. "Please," he said quietly, "there are things you deserve to know." I hesitated, every instinct telling me to be careful, but something in his tone, steady, controlled, made me step inside. The house looked the same. Same couch, same photos, same furniture, but the air felt heavier, like the truth had been sitting there waiting. Richard sat at the dining table and placed a thin folder in front of him. He didn't open it right away. "I won't waste your time," he said, "but I need you to understand something." I folded my arms, bracing myself. "Understand what?" "Why he asked you to leave," Richard replied. My throat tightened. "He didn't want me anymore," I said. "That's all there is." Richard shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "that's not why." He opened the folder. Inside were documents, bank statements, legal papers, names I didn't recognize, dates that stretched back years. "What is this?" I whispered. "Proof," he said, "of a life he didn't want you to see." The room felt like it was closing in on me. "He didn't push you out because he stopped loving you," Richard continued. "He pushed you out because you were getting close to the truth." My hands began to shake. "And the way you stayed quiet last night," he added softly, "that scared him more than anything else ever could." I looked around the house one last time, and for the first time, I understood something that made my stomach turn. The silence hadn't ended my marriage, it had exposed it. I didn't touch the folder at first. It sat on the table between us like something alive, waiting to be acknowledged. My hands rested in my lap, fingers clenched together so tightly they ached. I was afraid that if I reached for it, whatever was inside would become permanent, real in a way I couldn't undo. Richard didn't rush me. He leaned back slightly in his chair, giving me space, watching me the way someone watches a storm roll in, aware it was coming, respectful of its power. You don't have to look yet, he said, but you should know why I'm here. Why are you here? I asked. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. He folded his hands. Because your husband made a mistake that caught my attention. He thought pushing you out would protect him, Richard continued. What he didn't realize is that removing you from the picture made everything much easier to expose. I swallowed. Expose what? Richard slid one document out of the folder and turned it so I could see it. A bank statement. Not one of ours. Different account. Different bank. My name wasn't on it. This account has been active for 7 years, he said. Money has been moving in and out regularly, not just small amounts, large transfers. My heart began to race. He told me everything was joint. I said, we didn't hide money from each other. Richard met my eyes. He hid this. I finally reached for the folder. My hands were trembling now, no point pretending otherwise. I flipped through the pages slowly, each one heavier than the last. There were multiple accounts, business filings I'd never seen, property documents in another state, names I didn't recognize, but his signature appeared again and again, familiar and undeniable. This isn't just about money, I said, my mouth dry. No, Richard agreed. It's about deception. I looked up at him. Who are you? That question had been sitting in my chest since the moment I'd seen him at the door. Richard exhaled. I represent someone your husband has been lying to for a very long time. The room felt suddenly colder. Someone like me, I asked. In a way, he said, but with higher financial stakes. I closed the folder slowly. My head was spinning, pieces trying to arrange themselves into something that made sense. He didn't wake up one day and decide to throw me out. I said, this was planned. Yes, Richard said. It was. I let out a breath that felt like it came from the bottom of my lungs. All those years, I murmured, every time I asked why he was stressed, every time he snapped at me for no reason. Fear, Richard said. People become cruel when they're afraid of being exposed. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. So why tell me? I asked. Why involve me at all? Richard's expression softened slightly. Because you're not just collateral damage, he said. You're a witness. I looked at him sharply. And because, he added, what he did to you last night created a paper trail he didn't think about. My pulse quickened. What kind of trail? The kind that proves intent, Richard replied. And motive? Silence filled the room again, but it felt different now. He stood and gathered the papers back into the folder. I'm not asking you to do anything today, he said. I just needed you to understand what's happening. He walked toward the door, then paused. One more thing, he said. If he contacts you, calls, texts, anything, don't respond. Why? I asked. Because the moment he realizes you're no longer confused, Richard said, he's going to panic. The door closed behind him. I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by furniture that suddenly felt like evidence. My phone buzzed in my pocket. His name flashed across the screen, and for the first time since the TV went silent the night before, I didn't feel small. I felt ready. The phone buzzed in my pocket before the front door had even finished closing behind Richard. I didn't look at it right away. I stood in the middle of the living room, breathing slowly, letting the silence settle. The house felt exposed now, like it knew it had been caught holding secrets it could no longer protect. Every object around me looked the same, yet none of it felt neutral anymore. The phone buzzed again. I took it out and saw his name lighting up the screen. I didn't answer. I remembered Richard's voice, measured, telling me not to respond. Not yet. I flipped the phone face down on the coffee table like it was something dangerous, and focused on grounding myself. In through my nose, out through my mouth. Slow. This wasn't fear anymore. It was anger, but contained, sharpened into something useful. I walked through the house as if I were a guest, not an owner. My fingers brushed the edge of the bookshelf, the dining table, the hallway wall where we once marked our heights with pencil during a stupid argument about who was taller. I'd erased the marks later, thinking maturity meant letting things go. Now I wondered how many things I'd erased for him. I stepped into the bedroom. The bed was made perfectly, too perfectly. My side of the closet was almost empty, only a few hangers left behind like an afterthought. The dresser drawers were half open, shoved closed in a hurry. I sat on the edge of the bed and let out a quiet, humorless laugh. Of course, he wasn't just throwing me out. He was cleaning up. The realization settled, deep and heavy in my chest. This wasn't an emotional decision. It wasn't impulsive. It was strategic. That thought changed everything. I pulled the folder from my bag and laid it open across the bed. This time, I didn't skim. I studied. I lined the pages up the way I used to line up bills and calendars, dates aligned. Amounts circled, notes made in my head. Patterns appeared quickly, money moving in loops, properties bought and sold just under reporting thresholds, businesses formed, dissolved, renamed. Everything designed to stay invisible. My hands were steady as I worked. That scared me. I had always believed that if I ever discovered something like this, I'd fall apart, that I'd cry, scream, confront him immediately, but instead, I felt clear. Focus. I thought back over the years, the arguments that never made sense, the nights he came home late and brushed off my questions, the way he'd turn things around and accuse me of being paranoid. Gaslighting. I finally understood the word. He hadn't just lied, he'd trained me to doubt myself. My phone buzzed again. A text this time. Why aren't you answering? I stared at the message. For 10 years, I would have replied instantly, explained myself, smoothed things over, made sure he was comfortable. I typed a response, then erased it. Richard had been right. My silence wasn't weakness. It was pressure. I gathered the papers and put them back into the folder, leaving it exactly where it had been. I wanted him to believe I was still confused, still processing, still behind. That night, I went back to my sister's place. I slept better than I had the night before, not because things were okay, but because they finally made sense. By morning, I had 3 missed calls and 6 messages waiting. The tone changed with each. 1. Confusion, irritation, then something sharp and desperate. Stop ignoring me. We need to talk. You're being ridiculous. Read every message without responding. Instead, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, watching sunlight crawl across the floor. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something irreversible. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, it was Richard. He's reaching out, he said after I answered. I know, I replied. Good, he said. That means he's starting to feel it. What happens now? I asked. There was a pause. That depends on you, Richard said. But understand this, you didn't just lose a marriage, you gained leverage. Leverage, the word stayed with me long after the call ended. By sunset, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to warn him. I was going to let him keep talking, keep panicking, keep revealing himself. Because the truth doesn't need to be chased, it only needs space to surface. And for the first time in years, I had all the space I needed. I sat at the kitchen table long after Richard's call ended, staring at the folder of documents I had carefully put away. The house felt heavier in my mind than it ever had when I lived there. Every memory, every object, every quiet corner suddenly felt like evidence. Evidence of his deceit. Evidence of a life built around lies. I traced my finger along the edge of the table, thinking back to all the moments that didn't make sense before. Nights, he came home late with excuses that were always too rehearsed. Arguments that escalated suddenly and inexplicably. His sudden irritations, his unexplained absences. Everything I had brushed off as mood swings or stress now, it all made sense. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal. It was calculated, systematic, and it had been happening for years. Every smile, every I love you, every plan we made together, it had been a carefully maintained illusion. I pulled the folder back from my bag and spread the papers across the table. Bank statements, legal documents, business filings, transfers I didn't recognize, names I'd never heard of, properties registered under aliases. It all painted a picture of a second life. One that had run in parallel to the life I thought we shared. I felt my stomach knot with anger. My hands trembled slightly, but this tremor wasn't from fear. It was anticipation. The kind that comes when you realize you finally have the pieces of a puzzle you've been missing your whole life. This is why he wanted me gone, I whispered to myself. I could hear Richard's voice in my head, calm and deliberate. Your silence scares him more than confrontation ever could. It was true. My silence wasn't weakness, it was leverage. And for the first time, I understood that power. I sat back and let the magnitude of the situation wash over me. 10 years, every conversation, every plan, every moment of vulnerability used against me to maintain control. And now, For the first time, I could see it clearly. I began to piece together the timeline. Every time I asked about money, he had deflected. Every time I noticed inconsistencies, he had minimized them. Every time I trusted him, he had carefully orchestrated the narrative so I would never see the truth. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a prison built from lies. And now, he had handed me the keys by throwing me out. I realized that night, as the sun dipped low and the kitchen became a gold and amber haze, that I was no longer scared. I wasn't angry in a frantic way. I wasn't panicking. I was focused, calculated, patient. I picked up the folder again and began making notes, cross-referencing transactions, jotting down names, dates, locations. I marked the ones that didn't add up, the ones that pointed to accounts he had deliberately hidden. Every mark was a step closer to understanding the full extent of what he had done. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. He hadn't just lied about money, he had lied about everything. About trust, about loyalty, about the foundation of our life together. Each revelation fueled a quiet, simmering determination inside me. I realized I didn't need to confront him immediately. I didn't need to scream, to beg, to fight. He had already revealed enough. His own actions were doing the work for me. The phone buzzed again. Another text from him. Please respond. We need to talk. I let it sit. I let it wait. I didn't open it. I didn't type back. Every message he sent now only confirmed his panic. Every attempt to reach me was proof that my patience and silence had more power than any argument I could have had. I leaned back in the chair and let the silence fill the room. For the first time, I realized how dangerous calm could be, how threatening a quiet, steady mind could appear to someone accustomed to control. The next morning, I began to prepare. I didn't rush. I didn't make calls yet. I simply observed. I watched the house through the windows, noting every car that passed, every neighbor who lingered a little too long. I knew he would try to manipulate, to interfere, to control, and I needed to understand his patterns before making any moves. By mid, I had mapped out a timeline of his lies, of his secret accounts, of the people who had helped him build the second life he had hidden from me. I documented everything meticulously, every step, every transaction, every signature. It wasn't just a plan for revenge. It was a plan for justice, for truth. I felt a sense of empowerment growing inside me, not the type that comes from anger or vengeance, but the quiet, unshakable strength of someone who finally sees clearly, someone who understands that the person who tried to erase them has underestimated them completely. I looked at the folder and whispered to myself, "You thought you could erase me. You thought I wouldn't notice. You were wrong." The rest of the day passed in a blur of organization, notes, cross-references, and reflection. I didn't respond to him. I didn't call. I didn't even think about him the way I used to, desperately, anxiously. Instead, I focused on the leverage I now held, on the power of truth waiting to be unveiled. By evening, I felt a strange sense of peace, not because he was gone, not because the betrayal was over, but because I was finally in control. I realized then that staying quiet had not made me weak, it had made me dangerous, and dangerous, I knew, was exactly what he hadn't counted on. Everything made sense now. Not just the money, not just the accounts, not just the documents Richard had left behind, but the whole pattern of his behavior. The impatience, the irritability over nothing, the sudden coldness, the small digs that made me doubt myself, the way he twisted stories until I felt guilty for questioning him. He didn't kick me out because he stopped loving me. He kicked me out because he was afraid. Afraid that I would see the truth. Afraid that the carefully constructed world he had built behind my back would collapse. Afraid that the silence I held the night he told me to leave would expose him more effectively than any confrontation could. I realized then that my entire life with him had been a carefully controlled performance, and I had been an unwitting audience member, never the protagonist, never the decision-maker. For years, he had trained me to doubt myself, to second-guess every instinct, to believe that calmness and patience were signs of weakness. But now, I understood something powerful. My calmness wasn't weakness. My silence wasn't submission. It was strategy, and he didn't see it coming. I walked through the house once more, letting my hands brush over familiar surfaces. I felt the weight of years pressing down on me, not just the physical memories of furniture and photos, but the emotional weight of manipulation, betrayal, and deception. I paused in front of the living room window, staring out at the street. Cars passed by, neighbors walked their dogs. Life continued, oblivious to the storm I had just uncovered. And yet, I felt a sense of anticipation growing inside me. For the first time, I could see the path ahead, the steps I needed to take, the plan I had to execute. I didn't need to fight him. I didn't need to beg for answers. I didn't need to argue or plead. He had already revealed everything himself, and all I needed to do was watch, wait, and act when the moment was right. I began documenting everything meticulously, not just the papers in the folder, but every message, every missed call, every interaction. I traced timelines, cross-referenced accounts, and mapped out his connections. I built a network of facts, evidence that he couldn't manipulate or hide. The more I compiled, the more control I felt, the more empowered I became. I also began rehearsing scenarios in my mind. What would happen if I confronted him too early? What if I ignored him completely? How could I leverage the information I now had without tipping him off? I realized that patience was my most powerful tool. Every day I didn't respond. Every moment I stayed silent. The pressure on him grew. Every attempt he made to reach me was a step toward his own unraveling. That night, I sat alone in the quiet of my sister's apartment, folder open on the table, lamp casting shadows across the pages. I reflected on everything I had learned. I thought about the woman I had been the night he told me to leave the one folding dish towels, staying quiet, trembling with uncertainty. She was gone. In her place was someone alert, someone calm, someone who had finally seen the entire board and understood how the pieces fit together. I felt no fear, only clarity, and that clarity brought a new resolve. I would not be manipulated. I would not be rushed. I would not be afraid. I was no longer just surviving. I was preparing for the confrontation that wasn't yet mine to initiate, but one that I would control entirely when the time came, because he had underestimated me, and he would pay for that mistake, silently, strategically, completely. I went to sleep that night with a sense of purpose I had never known, not because I sought revenge, but because I understood my own power at last, and the knowledge that I could wield it was intoxicating. The next day, I would begin putting my plan into motion, not recklessly, not emotionally, but with precision, patience, and the quiet confidence of someone who finally knew the truth. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose that felt foreign but exhilarating. The woman who had packed her bags in silence, trembling yet obedient, was gone. In her place stood someone resolute, someone who had seen through the veil of lies and realized the power in quiet observation. I dressed deliberately, choosing my outfit not to impress anyone but to reflect the inner transformation I had undergone. The clothes felt heavier than usual, not because of fabric, but because they carried intention. Every step I took toward the mirror, every detail I adjusted in my hair or posture, was a reminder. I wasn't going to let anyone erase me again. I looked at my reflection, really looked. My eyes, once clouded with doubt and confusion, now held a sharp clarity. My jaw was firm, unyielding, my shoulders squared. There was an unmistakable weight to my presence now, one that came from the knowledge that I held control of my own life, my own narrative, and, crucially, the truth he had worked so hard to hide. Richard had called late last night to check in, his calm voice offering guidance without pressure. "You have everything you need," he'd said. "Now it's about timing, patience, and strategy, not emotion. That's your weapon." I remembered his words as I sat at the kitchen table, the folder of documents spread before me once more. Bank statements, legal filings, corporate registrations, emails, property records, each page a testament to a life he had hidden, each detail a thread I could pull to unravel the facade he'd maintained for over a decade. It wasn't just the financial deception that angered me, though that was substantial. It was the emotional manipulation, the constant undermining of my instincts, the quiet erasure of my confidence, the insidious pattern of control disguised as love. I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Who was I now? I was someone who had been underestimated, someone who had been silenced, someone who had survived the impossible quiet of betrayal. But I was also someone who was learning to act strategically, deliberately, with patience as my ally. The anger I felt wasn't reckless. It was sharpened into focus. Every past humiliation, every moment of doubt he'd cultivated in me, had been transformed into clarity and purpose. Began to plan systematically. Step 1. Gather all the information and organize it in a way that was defensible and undeniable. I created categories: accounts, properties, business dealings, communications. I cross-referenced every detail. marking inconsistencies, highlighting suspicious transfers, annotating dates. By the time I finished, the folder wasn't just a collection of papers, it was a map, a blueprint of deception meticulously constructed by him, now laid bare. Step 2. Anticipate his moves. I reviewed past patterns, how he reacted to challenges, how he attempted to regain control when things started slipping. I recognized the behaviors he relied on: intimidation, urgency, guilt. The more I studied, the more I realized that his control depended entirely on my compliance, my reactions. Without those reactions, his power diminished. Step 3. Establish boundaries. This meant cutting off any communication that wasn't absolutely necessary. His texts, calls, and messages would be left unanswered unless Richard advised otherwise. Each unanswered message was a subtle pressure point, a test of his patience and his overconfidence. Step 4. Prepare psychologically. I journaled my thoughts, rehearsed scenarios, visualized confrontations, not for confrontation's sake, but to maintain calm control. I reminded myself that emotion was a tool he had used against me for years. Now, it would be my shield, not my weapon. As the hours passed, I felt a profound shift in my identity. The scared, confused woman who had walked out of that house the night before was no longer present. In her place was someone meticulous, observant, patient, and intelligent. Someone who could operate in silence and still command attention. Someone who could navigate the complexity of betrayal and emerge unscathed. Even victorious. Richard had emphasized that I didn't need to rush. The longer you remain patient, the more he will reveal, he had said. Silence is not absence. Silence is pressure. I embraced that concept fully. I realized that every day I didn't react, every day I watched and waited, I was gaining the upper hand. He didn't know I understood the scope of his deception. He didn't know I was preparing, and that ignorance was my advantage. By late afternoon, I decided to test the waters. I didn't contact him. I didn't reply. I simply observed the subtle shifts in my own behavior and mindset. Confidence had replaced fear. Awareness had replaced doubt. Every small action I took was intentional, measured, precise. I reflected on my relationship with him not with longing, but with critical analysis. Every pattern, every manipulation, every subtle erasure became part of a dossier in my mind, a mental catalog of control and deceit. I realized the depth of my own resilience. I had endured, I had observed, and now I had strategy. That evening, I met Richard to discuss the next steps. He reviewed the folder and nodded approvingly. "You're ready," he said. "Your silence, your patience, your control, they've already started working. He's going to start making mistakes, revealing more than he intends. Your job is to remain calm and let the evidence speak for itself." I listened intently, internalizing every word. I felt a sense of empowerment that I had never known, not from revenge, not from anger, but from control over my own life and understanding of the situation in a way he could never anticipate. As I returned to my sister's apartment that night, I realized something profound. The person I had been, who allowed herself to be minimized, silenced, and manipulated, was no longer relevant. The woman I had become was deliberate, patient, and intelligent. She understood the stakes and knew exactly how to play the game without losing herself in the process. And with that understanding, I began to craft the plan I would follow step by careful step to ensure that when the time came, I would emerge not just unscathed, but victorious. No confrontation, no chaos, only quiet, controlled strategy. I was no longer reacting, I was orchestrating, and he would never see it coming. 3 weeks had passed since the day Richard first appeared at my door. 3 weeks of careful observation, meticulous organization, and quiet. Every message he had sent, every call he had tried to force, had been ignored. Every subtle action he had taken to provoke a reaction had been catalogued, analyzed, and stored away as evidence. I wasn't reacting. I was observing, learning, waiting. During those 3 weeks, I had transformed. The fear that once shadowed my every step had been replaced with confidence. The uncertainty that had weighed on me for years was gone, replaced with clarity and focus. I had become someone I barely recognized at first, a version of myself that was deliberate, powerful, and untouchable. I still went about my days in relative normalcy. I returned to work, to friends, to the routines that had once comforted me. But everything felt different. I was no longer the woman who had blindly trusted, who had questioned herself unnecessarily. I was calculating, patient, and aware of every subtle shift in my environment. Every interaction became a puzzle, a test of his control versus my observation. Then, one evening, it happened. The phone rang. His name flashed across the screen. The moment my eyes landed on it, a small part of me, the old part, the human part, reacted. My chest tightened, my stomach twisted with familiar tension. But I didn't answer. Instead, I held the phone, watching it vibrate against the table. Every buzz was a beat, a countdown, and then I heard the voice I had waited 3 weeks to hear. "What did you do?" It wasn't a text, not a careful, controlled message. It was a voice, panicked, confused, almost pleading. I set the phone down slowly, deliberately. My hand lingered over it, but I didn't pick it up. The silence that followed was deafening. He tried again. Call me back, please. I don't understand what's happening." I leaned back in my chair and smiled a small, quiet smile, not triumphant, but satisfied. I realized then how fragile his control had always been, how dependent he had been on my compliance, how easily it could crumble when I stopped playing his game. For 3 weeks, he had been building his expectations, expecting fear, expecting submission, expecting confusion, and now, nothing. I didn't pick up the phone. Instead, I reviewed the folder again, the documents I had organized so meticulously. Every transfer, every account, every hidden business was laid bare. I had traced the patterns, cross-referenced the data, and noted inconsistencies that even Richard admitted were startling in their audacity. I felt no rush, no immediate need to act. The longer I waited, the more mistakes he would make, the more panic he would reveal, and I would be ready. Later that evening, another text came. "Why aren't you answering? This isn't funny." I laughed softly to myself. He thought I would be rattled. He thought my silence was weakness. He was wrong. I prepared dinner, moved about my sister's apartment with purpose, and allowed my mind to wander through scenarios. What would he do next? How would he try to regain control? What subtle mistakes would he make as panic seeped into his carefully constructed life? Each possibility played out in my mind like a chessboard, each move anticipated, each response calculated. I had become someone who didn't just endure life's challenges, I orchestrated them, and I knew how to turn his own recklessness into proof of his deception. By nightfall, I had made decisions. I would not respond. I would not engage directly. I would let him dig his own pit while I remained calm, patient, and strategic. Richard called later that night. "He's panicking," he said calmly. "Did you see the texts?" "I did," I replied. I didn't respond. "Good," he said. "This is exactly what you need. Let him talk. Let him overextend himself. The more he panics, the more you gain. Just remember to stay composed. Don't let emotion cloud your strategy." I nodded. Even though he couldn't see me, I understand. The next few days were a delicate balance. I continued my daily routines, keeping the outward appearance of normalcy, while internally I catalogued every communication, every subtle hint of desperation from him. Each text, each missed call, each attempt to draw me back into his orbit became data, evidence, leverage. And then, inevitably, he made a mistake. It wasn't dramatic. It was small, almost imperceptible. A miscalculation in a transfer. A property left unregistered under an alias he thought I wouldn't notice. A casual remark to someone he thought was trustworthy. I noticed. I documented. I stored it, and I waited. The next time he called, his voice was tighter, sharper, more frantic. "You need to answer me," he demanded. "This is serious. I don't know what's going on. You're ruining everything." I didn't answer. I let the silence speak for me. Because silence, I realized, wasn't absence. Silence was pressure. Silence was control. Silence was my weapon. And in those 3 weeks, I had learned how to wield it with precision. For the first time in years, I felt unshakable. I wasn't reacting to fear, anger, or confusion. I was acting deliberately, strategically, with patience as my ally. And I knew that every panicked word, every irrational attempt to regain control, would only work in my favor. By the end of that 3rd week, I understood something fundamental. He had underestimated me, and that mistake would cost him everything. I didn't need to confront him. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to expose him yet. I only needed to wait, to observe, and to let his own actions become the proof of his deception. The woman I had been, the scared, anxious, compliant wife, was gone. In her place was someone patient, strategic, and unshakable. Someone who had finally realized her own power, and the moment I had been waiting for. The moment where the tables would turn was approaching. I smiled quietly, turning over the folder one last time before closing it. I knew exactly how the story would continue, not with chaos, not with confrontation, but with deliberate, quiet justice. And when it happened, he would see that I was never the one who had been powerless. I had only been waiting. The morning sunlight spilled through the blinds, casting long stripes across the floor. I sat at the kitchen table, folder open before me, coffee untouched, and waited. Patience had become a new muscle one. I flexed with quiet satisfaction. 3 weeks of silence, observation, and meticulous documentation had brought me here. The pieces were aligned. The timing was perfect. Richard called mid. He's going to make a move today, he said calmly. Be ready, but don't react unless I say so. Let him overextend himself. I understand, I replied. My voice was steady, controlled, unshakable. I felt a thrill I hadn't expected, anticipation without anxiety. For the first time, I was no longer in his orbit of manipulation. I was observing from outside, watching him trip over the very truths he had tried to conceal. By early afternoon, the inevitable happened. My phone rang. His name lit up the screen. But this time, it wasn't desperate or pleading, it was sharper, more controlled, but with an edge of panic that betrayed him. He was trying to regain authority, but it was too late. I let it ring. He left a message. Emily, call me. I need to explain. I can fix this. I didn't. I knew Richard was on his way to meet me. When he arrived, he brought an air of calm authority that grounded me further. He wasn't just an ally, he was a witness to the truth, a guide through the labyrinth of deception my husband had built. We reviewed the folder again, verifying details, ensuring that everything was irrefutable. Every hidden account, every unreported property, every misdirected transaction was documented, cross-referenced, and annotated. There was no room for dispute. By mid-afternoon, I received a knock at the door. My heart didn't race, my pulse didn't quicken. I rose from the chair, every step measured, and opened the door. He was there. Not panicked now, but cautious, wary. His posture was defensive. His eyes flicked around, noting the presence of Richard, noting my calm demeanor, noting the fact that I wasn't reacting. Emily, he said cautiously, can we talk? I stepped aside. Come in. He entered, and I motioned to the living room. Richard remained just behind me, a silent observer. The tension was palpable, but I didn't flinch. I didn't apologize. I didn't justify. I simply waited. He tried to assert control immediately. I don't know why you're ignoring me. I need to explain myself. I let the silence stretch, letting the weight of my quiet observation settle on him. Richard finally spoke. I think she understands more than you realize. His eyes flicked toward Richard, a flicker of recognition, unease, even fear. The control he had relied on for years, the certainty that he could manipulate me was gone. I opened the folder slowly, deliberately, and spread the documents across the table. Bank statements, property deeds, emails, and records. Each page was a revelation, each fact an accusation, without needing a single word from me. He stared. His composure faltered. His voice shook slightly as he tried to reclaim authority. Emily, this isn't what it looks like. Richard interjected gently but firmly. It's exactly what it looks like, and she has been watching, waiting, and preparing for this moment. I remained silent, letting the weight of evidence speak. Every hidden transfer, every alias, every misdirection, lay exposed. Every secret he had carefully cultivated for years now, unraveled under the scrutiny of calm observation. He stumbled over explanations, excuses, half-truths, and outright lies, but I was no longer listening for the truth in his words. I was observing the truth in his panic, the cracks in his confidence, the desperation that only grew as he realized he could no longer control the narrative. By the time the confrontation ended, the truth had spoken for itself. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to threaten. Silence, patience, and documentation had done what I never could have done in anger. He left that day not in triumph, not in satisfaction, not in control, but defeated, exposed, and powerless. Richard stood beside me as he walked out the door, not as a stranger, but as an ally, a witness, a partner in ensuring the truth prevailed. I felt a sense of liberation I had never known. The person I had once been, the confused, silenced, anxious wife, was gone. In her place was someone observant, strategic, patient, and powerful. Someone who had learned that strength often comes not from confrontation, but from quiet control, deliberate action, and careful timing. The house, the documents, the evidence, the silence, they had all aligned perfectly. And in that alignment, I realized something fundamental. The truth doesn't whisper forever. Eventually, it speaks, and when it does, it leaves nothing to question. I had been silent, I had waited, I had watched, and the truth had spoken. The days after the confrontation were surreal. The house, once a symbol of comfort and shared memories, now felt like a museum of lessons learned. Every item, every photograph, every object reminded me of how carefully my life had been manipulated, and how completely I had reclaimed it. I didn't scream, I didn't shout, I didn't beg, I didn't try to change the outcome with emotion. I simply remained calm, collected, and deliberate, and that calmness had been my greatest weapon. Richard stayed nearby, a steady presence during the entire process, not just as an ally, but as someone who understood the depth of what had happened and helped me navigate the next steps. He didn't push me into confrontation, he simply guided me in building a case, documenting evidence, and ensuring that when the moment came, I would have control over every move. My husband's world had collapsed quietly, piece by piece, under the weight of facts I had patiently collected. Each missed payment, each secret account, each hidden asset became proof of deception, and while he scrambled to cover his tracks, I remained a step ahead, observing, documenting, and letting his panic speak louder than any argument I could make. I realized that losing him, losing that relationship, was not just about heartbreak. It was about liberation, about reclaiming autonomy, clarity, and confidence, about understanding that my silence had never been weakness, had been strategy. He lost his composure completely when he realized that everything he had tried to hide could no longer be concealed. The arrogance he once carried, the belief that he controlled everything, was gone. Every demand, every plea, every attempt to manipulate me now fell on deaf ears. I didn't need to justify myself or argue. The truth had done it all. In court, Richard stood beside me, not as a stranger, but as an ally, a witness, a partner in ensuring justice was served. The evidence we presented was irrefutable. The carefully documented deception, the hidden accounts, the manipulations, it all became part of the record, a testament to years of secrecy finally exposed. When my husband's lawyer tried to spin the story, to downplay the evidence, I remained silent. My calm, controlled presence spoke louder than any defense he could offer. My patience, my preparation, my observation, it had all built to this moment, and the truth prevailed. He lost everything, not because I screamed, not because I fought, not because I cried or begged, but because I stayed quiet long enough to see the truth, long enough to prepare, long enough to act with strategy rather than emotion. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt a freedom I hadn't known in years. Every step was deliberate, every movement imbued with strength. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had reclaimed not only my life but my sense of self. I reflected on the day Richard first showed up at my door. I remembered the fear I had felt, the confusion, the uncertainty, and I realized how much had changed since that moment. Silence had been my ally, patience had been my strategy, observation had been my weapon, and now I had won. I never wanted to experience that kind of manipulation again, but I also knew I had gained something invaluable. A profound understanding of my own strength. I had learned that power doesn't always come from raising your voice. Sometimes, it comes from quiet, careful preparation, from letting others reveal their own truths, from being patient enough to wait for the right moment. And the man who thought he could erase me, he had miscalculated. He had underestimated the quiet strength that grows in those who are observant, patient, and deliberate. I had been silent, but silence had been my strategy. I had been calm, but calm had been my power. I had been patient, and patience had been my victory. From that day forward, I promised myself I would never allow anyone to diminish my presence, erase my voice, or manipulate my perception again. I had learned the most important lesson of all. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, strength is the quiet confidence that sees the truth, waits for the right moment, and acts with precision. And when the right man showed up at my door the day after he told me to leave, I finally understood what real power looked like. I listened, I observed, I prepared, and I won. The woman I had been was gone. The woman I had become was unstoppable. And the silence that had once felt like confinement now felt like liberation. I smiled, finally free, finally whole, and finally unafraid to be seen for who I truly was. If this story moved you, share it, because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Because sometimes, patience isn't inaction, it's power. Because sometimes, waiting is the most effective way to win.